Good evening. Welcome to everyone. So this is the first Saturday stream we've done where the membership's been open. So it is only members who can type in the chat. If you are, I assume YouTube tells you that you can't type if you can't type in it. But good evening to everyone. So the way we'll do this, we'll do it in the same way we have before in terms of the topics, because some poor buggers will have to watch this not live. So we focus on particular topics, but that shouldn't be too difficult at the moment, because I suppose there's a few ones going around. But the elections, first of all, I mean, just as I go live, I see that Sinn Féin have now confirmed what was basically known yesterday, that they will be the largest party in Northern Ireland. But we can discuss the Stormont elections as far as we can, although in reality, in terms of the actual election results, I mean, the headline stuff is, of course, Sinn Féin, the largest party. The DUP are still the second, quite comfortably in the end. I did have a look at the first preference things. I wonder if there's a lot of people put second preference for the Alliance Party. I wonder. But the Alliance Party have more than doubled the number of seats, so they've done very well. But there are still, I think, two more. I think there's two more seats to be declared. But that's where we are at the moment. Would I ever run for Parliament? I can't imagine myself running for Parliament. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of aspects to it. Like a big one for me is I don't like going and bothering people. So the idea of going around knocking on doors, I know you have to, and if that was the only thing, I would just sod it and do it. But I don't like it when people come knock on my door and bother me. I used to occasionally like the odd Jehovah's Witness on a Sunday morning back when I was single, and that was my entertainment for the morning. But by and large, people knocking on my door, hello, my name's so-and-so from such and such. Do you mind if I have a few moments? Yes, I do mind. You've just interrupted me. Bugger off. But there are other things as well. I don't like going to London. I don't like, big busy places, and London's a big busy place. I wouldn't even know how to get around it, and there's all the other things as well, so I'm really not sure. But also I don't really have to think about it too seriously, because I do not live in an area where it would ever credibly be the case, so probably not. After the recent elections, of the public really saying that unless Labour comes up with new policies, they'll be okay voting for continued theft, incompetence and corruption. Any thoughts? Yeah, see, the problem is the public don't see the Conservatives like that. They see the country not doing well. You can't fool the people that things are going well. They're not going well. All right, they know that, but they don't see the government as being thieves. They don't see it as the government doing these things to them deliberately. They see it as, at worst, incompetence. And here's the thing, the Conservatives will constantly tell people that as bad as it is under their rule, it will be worse under Labour. So you've got to get the public to believe that Labour will do better, because the public, when we say the public, which a lot of the voters that are quite crucial in an election, seem to think that the problems we've got in the country are due to external factors. It's not the government. They can believe that the government are not doing a good enough job to deal with those external factors, but they still think they're external factors. They don't see it as deliberate malfeasance on the part of the government. So yes, Labour do have to convince them that they have the policies that would be better than the Conservatives, and that they would more competently deliver them. They are winning the battle at the moment, but there's more that needs to be done. Haven't seen a politician in years. Didn't think banging on doors was a thing. It absolutely is, but again, they target. Well, if they've got any sense, they target anyway. So they identify the areas where they need to persuade people. And there's two types of people to persuade. There's the people to persuade just to go out and vote in general, like that might not be bothered. But then there's the people you're trying to change, get their votes. You don't necessarily go door knocking at every single address. They'll also know from lists, so obviously in a particular, like a constituency is quite a large area, but there's lots of polling stations in them, and they'll know based on the figures at each polling station, where are the ones where you get the most people going along to them and the most people vote in a particular way. So they'll target particular areas of their constituency to go door knocking. Jacob Rees-Mogg was out today in one of the towns, I can't remember which one, that is now going to come up for a by-election because of the Tory MP who was caught watching porn on his phone in the House of Commons. So, you know, they absolutely still do it. I mean, I've never had a candidate come to my door knocking. I have had activists in general. It's not always the candidate that will be there. They do go around as well, but they can't get around every house. Where was I? Could always pin a blue rosette on myself. That would mitigate the need for knocking in a lot of areas. Yeah, I don't think I should be doing that. Do I see Labour making significant more gains or just small gains, potentially enough to do a coalition? Right, I don't think a coalition is on the card. So if we look at the results, so let's get rid of these. And I can't remember which ones they are not. Yes, it's those ones. So this is where we are at the moment. There's still a couple for the local elections, a couple of councils to still declare. I assume that they're very remote areas with, like, you know, I don't know. Actually, all of Scotland's done. That must have the most remote areas. You've got to get the ballot box by helicopter in some places. So in terms of the game, the irony is this wasn't even the big one for Labour in terms of gains. But, you know, people saying things like, oh, you know, Labour, they only did moderately well. It's like they won 2/3 of all the seats that were on offer. 2 out of every 3 seats went to Labour. How on earth do you want them to do any better than that when you've got 5 mainstream parties active and a load of smaller parties? Could they do quite well in local elections? And you've got independents as well. In fact, you can see in the other column here, remember there's 2 councils still to be done, 658 have gone to either smaller parties or independents. You know, so, and there's just under 4,500 altogether, something like that. But anyway, so yeah, basically everyone did well apart from the blue ones. You know, Labour did well. They won 2/3 of the seats. They cleaned up London. They're now the second largest party in Scotland in terms of these elections. I know Ian Blackford described it as he didn't care. It's two, what did he call it? He said Labour and the Conservatives swapping over like that. It doesn't matter. He said it's like 2 bald men fighting over a comb. I'm not sure that's how he'd have characterised it when it was the SNP fighting for second position, but you know, there we go. The Lib Dems have obviously done really well. The Lib Dems have absolutely stormed what you might call the blue wall. If we have the red wall, we have the blue wall. The Lib Dems are tearing that down. Plaid Cymru were very interesting because it's not quite. It is sort of showing it here. I'm not sure how up to date this is, but Plaid they've taken actually a bit of a hit in the terms of the total number of seats, but they've gained councils, which suggests that they're focusing a bit more. The SNP have done really well in that they have been in government for some time. You know, the Conservatives trying to argue about, oh yeah, we're taking losses, but we're the party in government. The SNP are the party in government in Scotland, and they've still made gains. You know, just like Labour made gains in Wales. They are the party of government in Wales, and they made gains in Wales. The SNP are the party of government in Scotland, and they've made gains in Scotland. You know, the only party of government not to make gains is the Conservatives. The Green Party did really well as well. You know, they basically, in fact, they have more than doubled the number of seats out of the ones available. So yeah, all of the anti-Tory parties have all got things to crow about. And again, when all of those parties have something to crow about, there's always various reasons. They've all got their own little trials, but there's always one common thing between them as well, and that is that the party that previously held a load of those seats has done stunningly badly. So never mind the Daily Express saying, oh, it was a lot better than expected. No, it was not. No, it wasn't. Labour needs Scotland for a majority, if I remember correctly. No chance of that in the foreseeable future. There is no chance of it in the foreseeable future, and yes, realistic. This is why I don't really consider a Labour majority. I don't rule out the possibility that the Conservatives completely melt down. Whenever I sort of think about it, and I will say, yeah, Labour cannot win a majority because of this, that and the other. And yes, without Scotland, it's not happening. And they're not going to get Scotland anytime soon. People are not dissatisfied with the SNP, you know. And I know that you can vote one way in the Westminster elections and one way in the Holyrood elections. People are not dissatisfied with the SNP. And the SNP are actually, these days, a very impressive campaigning force. You know, when you talk about first past the post and parties that get a disproportionately high number of seats compared to their share of the vote, the two parties at the top of that, the Conservatives, but the SNP are right out there. The SNP really play first past the post very, very well, and then they also adapt to the different system for the Holyrood elections as well. So that is the sign of an effective campaigning team, that they know how to game the particular system, which is what Labour need to really sharpen up on, really. But also what the Conservatives may be failing on now, because you look at the situation now. Obviously, the Conservatives getting a result like this, obviously, publicly, they're going to try and say it's okay, and it's all, you know, like the Joker in Batman, The Dark Knight. It's all part of the plan. It's all part of the plan. It's mid-term thing, yeah, party in government, all the rest of it, ignoring the fact that party of government in Wales, party of government in Scotland. But it is really bad. So behind the scenes, they should be panicking and saying, what do we do about this? But they don't seem to be. You know, Boris Johnson's saying this shows that we need to double down on what we're already doing. It's like, what? Right. But anyway, could we see a Labour government next election and Lib Dem opposition? Right. So yeah. So I do not see Labour forming a coalition with anyone. I don't think that's on the cards. Right. So Labour, if things go according to our plan, or my plan, not the Conservatives' plan, Labour will form a government, but it will be a minority government, but it will be on their own. So they'll need a confidence to supply. They'll basically want an alliance, like in the Scottish Parliament right now between the SNP and the Greens, and like in the Welsh Parliament between Labour and Plaid. They need an alliance. So what that is, it's just saying to the Lib Dems, and ideally the SNP as well, these are the policies we agree on. We all agree that these policies are for the benefit of the country. So we'll put our backing behind them. So then Labour will get a legislative agenda that they can push through. Because otherwise, if they try and completely govern on their own, then every bit of legislation they need to get through will be subject to horse trading. And it'll be no good them saying, oh, well, the Lib Dems and the SNP are in favour of this as well, so they'll back us. You can't take it for granted. Political games. There's always bargaining. Even if you're in favour of something, you never go along with something unless there's something in it for you. So there'll be bargaining to be done. That'll slow the process down, so Labour will be limited in what they can do. So what they need to do is to make sure that right from the bat they've said to them, right, we're all in on this, just like the SNP and the Greens have done, just like Labour and Plaid have done in Wales. They need the same sort of thing. Labour and the Lib Dems are actually, I've heard, discussing common policy, common areas of interest. So they're already talking about these things. They can't have talks with the SNP, of course, because there's all sorts. Remember that Labour and the SNP are very much opponents in Scotland, and also Labour cannot fall into the trap, and it's not in the SNP's interest either. Labour cannot fall into the trap of because the Conservatives will push this. They've already started again, and they will. Oh, if you get Labour, you'll get a Labour SNP coalition because there's no other way of governing. So you'll get the nationalists in by the back door. So Labour have to make it clear that's not going to happen. And it won't happen. Coalition must remain an option. The numbers are not going to be there for a coalition. The Lib Dems... Now, okay, right. I'm not saying there's zero chance of it, because at the end of the day, if the Conservatives, like, I always base everything, you have to anchor things on various universal truths, right? One of my universal truths is, when it comes to a campaign, the Conservatives will run that campaign effectively. They've got the money, they can hire the brightest strategists in the world. Linton Crosby's their latest one. And they will run the most effective campaign, right? But it could be argued that such is their trap with Boris Johnson, and if once this bollocks Beergate is finished with, which apparently might take 6 weeks now, I've just seen some claim in a newspaper, I can't remember, someone clipped it. I don't know whether it's in the Mail on Sunday or what. 6 detectives for 6 weeks, absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, so, but when it is done, because the election's not imminent anyway, then you cannot rule out the possibility the Conservatives are genuinely melting down, actually melting down. And maybe the Liberal Democrats, because at the moment the Liberal Democrats are targeting 30 seats. Think about that. If the Liberal Democrats get all of their target seats and Labour get all of their target seats, that's still not really a robust coalition. The idea of Labour and the Lib Dems being able to do something together without the need for the SNP doesn't really seem likely. But it's not impossible. I mean, if the Conservatives really melted, but it's just, unless I think that's going to happen, I can't see it. Formal coalitions tend to burn smaller parties. I think Lib Dems might have learnt this now. Well, that's not always the case, though, is it? That was a particular case in 2010, and the Lib Dems acted unwisely. That wasn't a consequence of them going into coalition with the Tories. That was a consequence of allowing the Tories to go ahead with austerity. I mean, I've said before, the Lib Dems didn't have to form a coalition at all. All this nonsense about stability, absolute horseshit. What is better? Stable evil government or less stable progressive government? At the end of the day, the Tories came into power. The Lib Dems reckon they moderated the Tories, which in some areas they may have done. But they went along with austerity, which wasn't necessary. It's been debunked by economists long ago. David Cameron admitted years later that it was only done to shrink the state. It was just a typical Tory con. But anyway, thoughts about Lib Dems' success in Hull and Sunderland? Harder traditional sweet spots for them. Yeah. See, here's the thing, right? I loudly cheered along every single gain that the Lib Dems made, that Plaid made, that the SNP made, that the Greens made, that Independents made over the Conservatives. When the Lib Dems, however, take Labour seats, I don't cheer so much, because I am a Labour supporter at the end of the day. But the fact that the Lib Dem, I mean, the other thing to bear in mind, I will say this as well, and this is where we have to not get too carried away. The Liberal Democrats do tend to do better in times of political change in local elections, because first of all, they don't need as many votes. Second of all, people know the reason why the Lib Dems don't get as many votes nationally. It's not because they're not popular enough. They don't get as many votes as they ordinarily would. It's because people know ultimately they can't form a government, right? Otherwise, they would actually get more votes. If you sent people into polling booths with one of those Men in Black memory loss things, so that people forgot about the results from previous elections, so they just looked at the policies of each party and they had no idea how popular each party was, loads more people would vote Lib Dem. There are a lot more people who are in tune with the Lib Dems in this country than actually vote for them. It's because a lot of people vote tactically when it comes to it. But in local elections, a Lib Dem can win. So they do get more votes in places, because you go along and thinking, well, the Liberal Democrats could take this. So you will get lots of people who will vote Liberal Democrat in a local election, and then they'll vote either Labour or the Conservative in the general election, tactically. Lib Dems may yet come to be needful party, do you mean that? Do you mean needed party? In which case, yeah, they absolutely will. They absolutely will. They will be in some way or other. I mean, in order to be a major player in the next parliament, it all depends. Does all depend on the numbers. That's why you can't form any sort of alliance before people talking about an electoral pact. You can't. Well, not electoral pact. Sorry, electoral pact is fine. Progressive alliance is the way I'll describe it. You can't really form one until after the elections because it depends on the size of it. You know, if the Liberal Democrats come away from the next general election with like 20 seats, okay. If they come away with 40 seats, then that puts them in a stronger spot. So, you know, so although I say that I'm hearing that Labour and the Lib Dems are talking about common areas of interest, you know, how much there will still be bargaining. How much bargaining power the Lib Dems have depends on how necessary their votes are, and you know whether or not it gets it across the line without the need for the SNP. Right, let's have a look. Under the coalition, the Tories took all the credit for the Lib Dem policies and the Lib Dems took the blame for all the Tory policies. Well, this is the thing, though. What we've got to understand as well. There's a load of the idea of conservatism is the idea of the self, right? It's the idea that your fate is down to you. You know, not circumstances. You know, there's no barriers to you in life. You know, if you want to succeed, you have to work hard, which is true. But they think that the two things are tied exclusively, that if you do work hard you will succeed. But it's all about the self. It's all about what I can get for me, based on the assumption that anyone else who suffers from you getting as much cake as you can is doing so because they're too lazy. So Conservative voters will be, and I'm not saying all Conservative voters are selfish people by any means, but there is a core of Conservative voters who are like that, and they will not harshly judge their party. Whereas the Lib Dems lost a lot of support because there were a lot of principled voters of the Lib Dems who were not at all impressed with austerity. So the austerity, although it was a Tory policy, was far more damaging to Lib Dem support than it was Conservative support. Anyway, right, let's have a look. I've lived in New Zealand, which had coalition governments for more than 20 years. I mean, there's a lot of countries in Europe that have coalition governments. And then it's not all, you know, there's no perfect system. But, it does make parties have to work together. And sometimes they don't. And sometimes the coalition breaks down because you do not have the right numbers for the parties who can work together to be able to form a majority. So it can break down. But in this country, it's just this winner takes all. You can have a government that gets, like the Conservative Party, they get about 43% of the vote and they have 100% of the power. And they're not even representing all 43% of those people. Because look at the people who are not happy about the way things are going. And not all of the Tory loss of support is Partygate. Remember, Boris Johnson lost a safe Tory seat in a by-election last year, months before Partygate. That was just his policies. It wasn't a scandal. There was no scandal that caused the loss of Chesham and Amersham, was it? It was last June or whenever it was. It was last summer sometime. It was before all the scandals erupted. It was just because they weren't impressed with his policies. And these were the policies that were in the manifesto. They voted for them. Netherlands, it's always a coalition which makes for a compromise every time. This coalition thinking has become stale in the last 2 decades, though, because compromises are calculated. Well, yeah, I mean, where you've got political parties, there's always you've got politicians, you're always going to have calculations. But anyway, let's have a look. Go on then, we could move on now. We've got 25 minutes through, so we could move on to the Beergate topic. I don't think I've necessarily got a lot extra to add. It says, timing of Durham police, interesting, cannot help feeling this is a stitch-up. It's absolutely a stitch-up. If fined, Starmer will probably have to resign. Red top field day, Johnson won't resign. He won't get. So a few days ago, when I was looking at the local election and I was going, look, there'll be Conservative losses, there'll be Labour gains, there'll be Lib Dem gain. You know, when I was saying, look, you know, it's going to be the seats that were coming up in the local elections were Lib Dems target seats, so you'd expect Lib Dems to do really well. They weren't really the Labour target seats, but you'd still expect them to gain because the Conservatives should be losing a load and Labour should be, you know, collecting a lot of those up. But it was not going to be the Conservatives losing 600 seats type thing. Although in the end, although it says net 400, that's in total about 500 they've lost. They've lost, I think, about 450 seats. So it's actually a hell of a lot still. So it's more than I thought. But I did sort of say, such was the panic from the Conservatives that I wouldn't exactly say I'll eat my hat if they lose, you know, 500 or 600 seats, which is just as well because they've lost about 450. But if Starmer is, first of all, he won't be fined. We know he won't be fined. How do we know he won't be fined? Because Durham police refused to fine Dominic Cummings, saying they do not apply fines retrospectively, right? But it doesn't matter. Will they say that an offence was, that Keir Starmer committed an offence? Right, that's what matters. Will they say that, or will they clear him again? I am 99.9% certain they'll clear him, and I'll tell you several reasons why. I'll try and avoid repeating anything from this. First of all, I've now seen what this new evidence is apparently supposed to be. It's based on the idea that Labour planned to have the curry in advance. Okay. They planned to have a meal. That's fine. There's nothing illegal about that. That's all fine. So basically, they've got nothing. And I've seen legal experts look at it as well, which is always important. Always wait for the legal experts. And they're looking at it and going, yeah, you've got nothing here. Now, if it's true that there's going to be 6 detectives for 6 weeks and they're going to open up a special operations room, that implies they're going to get, like, people from the public, anyone that might have witnessed something, to be able to call in and give evidence. So, you know, something might turn up, I don't know. But what I do know is that Keir Starmer, he was Director of Public Prosecutions, right? He was a top lawyer. And you don't become a top prosecutor without being meticulous about your cases. You know, he was up against people with very expensive defences, you know, so and he had to be absolutely meticulous about everything. As soon as any suggestion that people may even accuse him of breaking the law in that Hartlepool meeting, he would have gone over if indeed he didn't beforehand, he will have gone over everything with a fine-tooth comb. Keir Starmer right now knows for certain whether or not he's fine. You know, the police are surely not going to make a mistake. They're going to make sure they get this dead right. They're not going to try. I mean, because at the end of the day, Keir Starmer, if they say he committed an offence, he can appeal it. He can go to court and appeal it. Right? And one of the top lawyers, I cannot say it enough, he was one of the top lawyers in the country. This man is not going to go in there and make a mistake. So, you know, it's like, no. There's only that 0.1% of me that just says, well, I don't know what's going to get turned up, you see. But, yeah, I just can't see it. For me, it was just one of those things I thought, well, at least the police have just been put under pressure, right? They've been put under pressure by the media, so they have to do it, otherwise they'll not go away. And they've just thought, fine, we'll do this. And I was just thinking, few detectives, spend a week going over stuff, and then come out of it and go, don't be bloody stupid. There's no offence committed here. So, yeah, if it is, and I've only seen a clip of something, I've not heard it direct from, you know, Durham police. If they're going to spend 6, they're actually planning on waste. And what must 6 detectives' salaries amount to in 6 weeks? That's a shocking waste of public money. But anyway. Sue Gray report cannot be released until Beergate is concluded. Oh no, it is. That's got nothing to do with it. As soon as the Met Police have finished, then the Gray report is supposed to be published. And the other thing to bear in mind is, as soon as even though Johnson could delay the Gray report, whether he will is another matter, but he could. As soon as the Met Police are finished, Boris Johnson is facing the Privileges Committee investigation. I just don't know when the Met Police are going to finish. I mean, put it this way. If Durham reckon they need 6 detectives for 6 weeks to investigate, I don't know how many people it would involve, but it's not very many people. And the focus is on Keir Starmer, although there were others there. You know, how much longer do the Met Police think they can spend investigating dozens of people across because this is just one event in Hartlepool. How many, you know, do they think they can, how long do they think they can spend? Because there was what, about a dozen different events they're investigating at Downing Street with dozens of people involved. I don't know. Yeah, Sinn Féin now confirmed. They were confirmed just before I went live, I noticed. For some reason the BBC's been really slow on it, but I did see I did see something else there. How many curries that perfect detective? I don't know, because I don't know how many were there. You know, obviously there would have been party activists as well as the MP, the local MP. Well, they weren't an MP at the time because they were fighting a by-election. The candidate, I suppose. It was the MP's office. And a few other people, strategists and so on. But anyway, don't think Starmer investigation leads to anything, but if by some he's found, he'll resign. Well, the thing is, do you know what? Oh, I'll read the rest of it. Then Johnson is really up the spout, or else he isn't fined, and then Johnson is worse off. The thing is, Starmer has actually said that he won't resign. Now, to me, that's stupid, because he's not going to be fined. So if I were him, I'd have said, safe in that knowledge, yes, of course, if I were to be fined, and I'd put in about the appeal, I'd said, well, I've not broken any rules, so I would absolutely appeal it, because I would think it'd be wrong. But if my appeal fails and I'm fined, yes, I will resign. He should have said that. Absolutely. Hi, Michael. Absolutely. I don't understand it, why he wouldn't do that. Why? Because the problem now is, so let's think this through. So Keir Starmer says he won't resign. So now we've got 6 weeks of the Tories going, but you call for Johnson to resign and you won't resign yourself. And it's going to blunt like Starmer already, like, he is good in PMQs and he gets Johnson he sets little traps for Johnson. He's quite good at that. But he's not a really good rabble-rouser speaker. He's not one of those. And he's just going to have everything blunted for the next 6 weeks. My worry is that it has a material impact on the polling. That is my worry. And where does 6 weeks place us? It places us into like late June. Absolutely. It's nearly the summer recess. Oh no, absolutely nonsense. I have great fear. It's just logic. Starmer's not going to get fined on any level. Like, first of all, everything we've heard, you know, all of this, all the stuff that, because I've already read the Mail on Sunday's report for tomorrow. I've already on the online version. It's got nothing. There's nothing in there that was illegal. I've seen James cleverly going, the curry was pre-planned. Yeah, that wasn't illegal. Oh, Angela Rayner was there. Yeah, she's not illegal. Oh, you said other places weren't serving food. No, he didn't. Where do you think he got the curry from? What he said was there were no restaurants where you could go and have a meal, which you couldn't because it wasn't allowed. You know, restaurants were only allowed to serve people outside, and even then in small groups. Well, first of all, it's freezing. This is April. Hartlepool is like 7 degrees out there at that time. Not going to sit outside. But anyway. If Starmer really did feed curry to 30 people for 200 quid, then he needs to be in charge of the country and the economy. Man's got legendary negotiating skills. This is a very good point. Yes. Although I will point out, Hartlepool is not the most expensive place to live. So, you know, what you might think is a really cheap deal in some parts of this country, unfortunately in the northeast, it's a very deprived area, and actually it's not that bad. You know, this is what I say. You're people who live in the south of England, for example, and you may think about, you know, house prices and the cost of this and the cost of that. I'll tell you what, if you move up north, and your eyes will. I've known people who've come from the south. They've spent like 10, 20 years in the south. They've got their house. They sell up. They move north, and they had a little pokey house. They've got a big, massive 5-bedroom detached house in the north. It's cheap as chips. Anyway, can a future Labour government do anything about the state of newspaper ownership in GB? Level of Tory bias at the moment is dreadful. I mean, the answer to that, of course, is the government can do anything if it's got the votes in Parliament. But in politics, like in anything, you have to pick your battles, don't you? If we go back to, for example, Tony Blair's time in government. Now, Tony Blair had a huge majority, had a lot of votes on his side. There were things that even he knew that needed dealing with and didn't, including the media. So, you know, he just thought it was better to try and get them on side rather than front up to them. And I don't know whether that was a mistake or not. I think some things he did were a mistake. I'm not sure about that one. Uncle Social there. I moved from north to south, cost of my house more than doubled. Oh dear. Yeah, you're supposed to do it the other way around, really. Yeah. All we need now is for the Tories to be horrified that the restaurant owner is a Labour Arty member and Starmer was giving money to a crony. Yes. Well, but I mean, you don't. You at the moment, the Tories' tactic is this. It's really simple. They cannot rescue Boris Johnson's credibility. It's impossible. He's a criminal. He's a liar, and everyone knows it. There is no way of getting past that now. There is no way of resurrecting that image. So, when it comes to an election, it doesn't matter who's up. It's a choice for people between two. At the last election, I mean, you know, you vote for your local candidate, you vote for your party, there's all sorts of things. A lot of people treat it like a presidential election. Who do we want to be Prime Minister is what they say. So in 2019, for those voters, and there's a lot of them, it was a choice between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn. And for whatever reason, they thought, well, Boris Johnson, we'll vote for the clown. That'll be a good idea. The guy who's been sacked for lying as a journalist, and the guy who was sacked for lying as a politician. He's the man. Look how that's worked out. But anyway, doesn't matter. That was the choice. At the next election, it'll be between Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer. Now, what the Tories are trying to do is identify Boris Johnson's negative traits, the things that put voters off, and make sure that voters think that Keir Starmer shares those traits. Now, and it is fairly desperate stuff, because I really don't think it'll have that much cut through for two reasons. First of all, even if you get people to believe that, first, it's Boris Johnson is still more guilty because Boris Johnson made the rules. Boris Johnson flouted them more blatantly. Like the worst case scenario, Keir Starmer is found to have inadvertently broken the rules because he was undoubtedly in Hartlepool for work. Undoubtedly. No one can dispute that. So the worst that can happen is that the police say it sort of went from a work event into a social event. You didn't technically need to be there for that. And so at that point you broke the law. That's the worst case scenario, whereas Boris Johnson's were more blatant, and also Boris Johnson's were more frequent, and he's the Prime Minister, not the leader of the opposition. So on all those counts, worst case scenario is that Boris Johnson is still more guilty. But the other reason why it will have limited cut through is because at the end of the day, Partygate is very serious because people were dying and Boris Johnson was saying you can't see your loved ones, and that's why it hurts people. Keir Starmer didn't tell anyone they couldn't see their loved ones. I mean, that is again the sting of Partygate. It's not the fact that Boris Johnson partied. It's not the fact that he broke the law that pisses a lot of people off. It's the fact that a lot of people had loved ones dying and they couldn't be with them, and it's Boris Johnson that told them they couldn't be with them while he was partying, whereas Keir Starmer didn't tell anyone that. So, and the other reason as well is just the key issue for people in the here and now is the cost of living. That's the key issue. It's still more for a curry than that, Phil. I've got relatives in Hartlepool, but a curry takeaway is still a £5. Yeah. So 30 people for 200 quid. You know, if it was a £5, that'd be 150 quid. So you've got enough for the old poppadoms and rice on top of that as well, haven't you? So at the same time, £5 is still pretty cheap. I remember 20 years ago, more than 20 years, I'm old, it's more than 20 years ago now, but when I was in university at Manchester, you know, you'd go in as a group of students into the curry house and you'd get a deal where it was £5 a head and you would get your curry and rice, poppadoms and pickle tray and a bit of naan bread. But that was over 20 years ago. Should we take a leaf out of France and flood London to send a message enough is enough? No, I think, like, when it comes to protesting, France are very robust with it, but I think they always go too far. What I'd like us to do is have a nice happy medium where we don't just grumble. Like in Britain, we tend to just grumble about things. We should do a little bit more than just grumble. Maybe not set fire to sheep. There's got to be a halfway point where you robustly protest, but you don't do it over every little thing, and you don't step over certain boundaries. But anyway, let's have a look. Where are we? Cost of living crisis began with austerity. Yes, it did. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, everything fed into itself. So austerity created the conditions to allow for Brexit. Brexit allows the conditions for the Tories to basically rip the copper wiring out of the national infrastructure is what they're really doing. You know, they're stripping the assets from the country. And the problem with something like that as well is getting them out of government isn't even a big victory. It's a sigh of relief because they've still asset stripped the country. It's still gone. You know, it's not an easy thing to get it back when people talk about, you know, we should nationalise these public services. Yes, we should. Every single one should be. But it's not as simple as doing that because it takes a lot of time and money to do it. You'll be pilloried in the press for doing it. And then the Tories will come straight back into power and they'll strip the assets again. You know, you have to come up with a system of stopping them doing that. And we'll not have very many left. I think we're getting an election this year then, if so this time of year. I don't necessarily think it's likely we'll get an election this year, but the possibility is there. You know, it depends on certain conditions. Ultimately, there's two pressures on the general election this year. The first of which is Boris Johnson, right? If it looks like Tory MPs are going to get rid of him, he may press the nuclear button of general election. He's threatened it. He's threatened a general election in order to stop Tory rebels challenging him. Now, that pressure is removed if Tory MPs stick by him, which at the moment they seem to be. Like, people thought the local elections would be a flashpoint. I said, I don't see it. How could they be? They're not. No. There was one MP, I think, yesterday tried to suggest it's now it's time to get rid of Boris Johnson. There might have been two. Tobias Ellwood definitely is, but he already has. But that's not gained any traction. So unless there's letters, unless MPs are just waiting for Parliament to reopen next week to put their letters in, which is possible, but you would think correspondents would get a bit of a feeling. You know, there'd be a bit of friction, a bit of electricity in the air, and someone would get wind of a mood. I've not seen any reports of that. So I'm going to say Boris Johnson's fine with the local elections. The Beergate thing with Starmer might actually work to distract from all the stuff coming up for Boris Johnson as well. Because remember, Tory MPs don't actually care that Boris Johnson's guilty of all these things. They say they do, they don't. They knew he was guilty of these things and they haven't done anything about it. He's now been convicted. He's not appealing that conviction. They still don't care. They don't care about anything. They don't even care about the Gray report. All they care about is it damaging Boris Johnson enough that they'll lose the election? If they can be persuaded to give it time and see if Beergate tarnishes Starmer's reputation, which they may well do now, then they'll keep him in place. They're fine with him. They ain't got a problem. As long as he can win in the next election, they ain't got a problem with him. So, and then the other pressure is, is Labour going to ride higher in the polls because is the cost of living crisis going to really cripple the Tories? That pressure again depends on Labour, so they may wait and see on that one. If Labour can take the initiative up to summer now, and those by-elections will be crucial. If Labour can win Wakefield and they can start to get more of a national message out as well, they may judge that Boris Johnson's leadership apart, it's better to go to the polls this year than wait till next year or the year after. So it's really down to that. Until it's done, until they actually try and trigger the election, we won't really know, because the conditions are not ideal for them to run an election. If the Tories are riding high in the polls now, we'd have had an election this week. But they're not. So while they're not riding high in the polls, it's not a good time to go to the elections. But those are the two factors. And both of them are partly based on how Labour deal with the situation now as well. Big concern, one term of Labour won't be enough to fix all the Tory damage. No, it won't. Priority has to be hanging on to power beyond one term. Yes, absolutely. And this is why, when you think about my most important, what I think are the most important policies right now, specific cases, proportional representation is my top priority, absolute top priority. I would prioritise that over everything. But they also have to do it both sides. They first of all need to make sure that they can bring in electoral reform. Next thing they need to do is they still need people to vote for them. So they need to show people that their lives are getting better. And here's the big problem, and this is what I hope Labour's got a plan for. So Labour has taken their particular view of Brexit as make Brexit work. Okay. And I can understand the strategic benefit in it in terms of winning the election. It's a way of saying, look, these are the areas we need to capture. The areas down there are for the Lib Dems. So they adopt one particular Brexit policy, we adopt another, and then we meet in the middle. But I hope Labour have got a plan, because the bottom line is this: you do not boost the economy without reversing Brexit. It's really that simple. What is holding our economy back is not COVID, it's not the Ukraine war. All of these things are pressures, but they're pressures that other countries have to deal with as well. When I say, boost our trade, our growth at the moment is way behind comparable countries, and they've got all those external pressures as well. The reason why we are trailing behind is because we've imposed economic sanctions on ourselves. So we have to remove those economic sanctions. And the more tentatively they do it, the less benefit there will be. We can align more closely with the EU and we'll get a trade boost. We'll get, but that won't help. That won't cause the cost of commodities to suddenly fall a lot, and it won't cause a sudden increase in jobs, because it's tinkering around the edges. That's the problem. So they've now got to think of a way of boosting the economy, making sure people feel the benefits of that boost to the economy, not letting all the billionaires rake it all up, and without committing to rejoin the single market. So they must have, and I can think of various plans they could have, but they need a plan. Oh, that's caught my eye. My daughter's judo coach is an ardent Brexiteer. I used to do judo. He thinks Michelle Barnier is a racist. With attitudes like that, the road ahead for Labour is not paved with gold. What's your daughter's judo coach doing talking about politics in a judo class? I didn't know the political leanings of any of my judo instructors. Anyway. Labour need to be better at lying like the Tories. No, they don't. No. Promise anything to get in power, then rip a manifesto and their actual agenda. No. Must never do that. But here's the thing. Right. The lesson was learnt. Surely the lesson was learnt in 2015 by the Lib Dems. Right? What happened? Lib Dems and the Conservatives formed a coalition. Tory austerity. Lib Dems lost all their seats. The Tories gained. The Tories gained because Lib Dem supporters who are more principled abandoned them. If Labour do something unprincipled, their supporters will abandon them as well. You know, it's just unfortunate. It's one of those things. The Conservatives get away with lying because it is the party of selfishness. And there's various things you have to factor in as Labour leader. And I said it enough to Corbyn supporters, stop whining. I would also say it to Starmer supporters. They have to stop. Things you have to accept. They're not fair, but you have to accept them. The right-wing media, and that's the bulk of the mainstream media, will absolutely smear the crap out of you. You also have to factor in that it'll be very difficult to get your message out, because when they're not smearing you, they're also not talking about your gains. Why, for example, were the mainstream media today, apart from like one or two exceptions, why were they not talking about the local election results on the front pages of today? Right? Why was there a picture of the pissing Queen on the front of the page, the papers? Because even the papers that can't be asked to jump on this Beergate bandwagon do not want to report good news for Labour. Even the Mirror, which is left-leaning, but it's, you know, owned by the same people as the Express, it had the picture of the Queen on the front. There's nothing about the local elections. So, you know, these things you have to factor in. And you also have to factor in that you cannot get away with lying. Or not very much anyway. You know, you have to make your promises and you have to follow through on those promises, because people will hold you to those promises. People don't hold the Conservatives to promises. You know, when it comes to the next election, people who voted Conservative don't say, did the Conservatives keep their promises? What they say instead, they ask two questions. First, am I happy enough with them? And second, do I think they're better, even if they're not happy, do I still think they're better than with Labour? You know, with Labour, they absolutely go, did you meet your promises? So anyway, then they're doomed to be in opposition. The cards are stacked. They are stacked, but they're not doomed to be in opposition because they have won far too infrequently. But they have won, and they will win again, I hope. PR is too complicated for people to understand. I don't understand it working in Whitehall. There's very simple forms of it. We use PR, like, you know, we have proportional representation in the UK. We used to use it to elect MEPs. Why don't we just use the same system? I'm happy using the same system. I'm not saying it's necessarily the best system, but I'm happy with it. And the thing is, the problem, like what you wouldn't want to recommend is a form of proportional representation that's very similar to, say, Belgium or the Netherlands or Italy or something, because then it'll be like, oh, they're trying to bring in this EU system, this dirty European system, you see. So what we need is to be able to, this is British proportional representation, and use the British system, which may well be shared by other European countries. It doesn't matter. We just use the system that we've always used, well, we've used for a long time anyway, for electing MEPs. It's like, vote for who you want. Vote for it. Do you want to vote Labour? Vote Labour. You know, vote for. You don't have to do anything like in Northern Ireland. You can just say, look, vote for them. Vote for your party. Like we did. Well, it was candidates, but you know, but they had the party name beside them. Just do that. If we had proportional representation, Labour would always be in government, if not in power. Well, a lot of the time, you know, familiarity breeds contempt. Over time, what would happen is the Conservatives would have to become more moderate. They might split into two parties. We may get UKIP or whatever it becomes. The Jacob Rees-Moggs and the Steve Bakers over there somewhere. and the more moderate Tories, and they may end up forming coalitions with the Lib Dems and even the Greens or someone, you know. But Labour would be in power a lot more often, probably more often than the Conservatives. I mean, David Blunkett, you know, said something interesting today when he was saying that Labour shouldn't be ruling out formal alliances. I mean, in many ways, they have to rule out formal alliances because the Tories have just legislated against them. But he also said, you know, the issue is you have the Conservative Party, which is itself a collection of different tribes. You know, you have a whole series of different right-wing groups within the Conservative Party. He said the problem on the left is that all of those different groups are their own party. So you've got the SNP, you've got Plaid, you've got Labour, you've got the Green Party, and then to a lesser extent you've got the Lib Dems because they're sort of more central. You know, so they're all different parties and they all put up different candidates, whereas the Conservatives are all different groups on the right, but they're all in the same party. They put up one candidate. PR works fine. Is Scotland dirty now? Well, it is a little bit because it doesn't use PR, you see. You know, same as in Wales. Most of its MSPs are elected using first past the post. Whereas what I would be talking about is full proportional representation. And as I say, it needn't be complicated. It wasn't complicated for European elections. No one complained. Well, someone might have done. Tories probably might have complained about it. I didn't complain. End of the day, it was easy. I went along. Oh, Labour. Poof. Easy. No problem. You have multiple candidates for your party. Bang, bang, bang. But anyway. AV plus. See, I'm not... Right. So here's the thing. I think proportional representation is the best one. Like I was mentioning someone today, really quick, last few minutes. So in they accused me of saying that I was an advocate for the Northern Irish transferable vote system. I am not. In fact, whenever I discuss electoral reform in videos, I think I go to pains to say I'm not a fan of the transferable vote system. What I said in the video today was that it's a more representative system, which it is, but it's not representative. You know, if we look, in fact, I've not actually shown this one all night. If we look here, for example, what have we got? So I think they mentioned the TUV, which I think is fair enough. TUV gets 7.6% of the first round votes, so the first preference votes. They have one MLA, don't they? Hang on, are there all results in yet? Oh, still waiting for two, I think. Where's the TUV gone? There we go, one. They've got one MLA. There's 90 seats, 7.6, and that should translate about what, 6 or 7 MLAs. They get one. It's not representative, right? But it's better. It is better. So that's why I would say proportional representation, because at the end of the day, if a party gets 40% of the vote, I want it to have 40% of the MPs. No ifs or buts, 40%. If it gets, you know, if it's 39 or 41, I'm not going to moan. But if it gets substantially or significantly more or fewer, that's wrong. But anyway, so we'll sort of run out there of time. Thanks very much for coming on. We'll do this again next Saturday. It may be trickier to decide on what the topic is, so when I put it up, I'll try and remember to put it up tomorrow so that it's ready there, as well as the Wednesday one for members of the MP tier and above. There is no above. MP tier. I'll put that one out for Wednesday as well. That'll just be visible to members. I will read this last comment out first though. Guys, don't make the beginner's mistake of starting a fight over what PR system you want. First get the idea solid. It's a common issue on the left progressive side. Don't start infighting. So that's the thing I mean, I'm very pragmatic, as you know, hopefully. I will take any system that is better than what we have now, including the system that's used in the Scottish and Welsh parliaments. It's just that. My issue with it is if you do a little tentative baby steps reform, then you've got to wait probably another 20 years before you reform it again. and I'd really rather just get it all done. But I will absolutely take any system that is better. I will take single transferable vote or any form of transferable vote system if that's on offer. But there it is. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Have a good evening all, and until next time, I will see you later.